Did you know that during the medieval period from roughly 500 to 1500 CE, women were not just passive figures waiting for a knight in shining armor? Were they truly uneducated, powerless, and confined? Get ready to challenge everything you thought you knew about these incredible women who shaped their world with ingenuity and strength. Number 5. Myth medieval women were universally uneducated and illiterate. The common image of medieval women often paints them as entirely unlettered, their lives limited to domestic tasks with no access to books or formal schooling. This widespread belief suggests that literacy was a privilege reserved exclusively for men, especially monks and clergy, and that women simply did not participate in intellectual pursuits. The thought is that the ability to read and write was not only unnecessary for most women, but perhaps even discouraged, keeping them in a state of ignorance. This perspective overlooks a vibrant and often surprising reality, one where women were not only educated, but also significant patrons of learning, accomplished writers, and even teachers who fostered intellectual environments. The idea that illiteracy was a universal female condition across the entirety of the medieval millennium is a simplification that ignores the nuanced social structures and individual accomplishments of countless women. The truth is far more complex and compelling. While widespread literacy as we understand it today was certainly not common for any social class, male or female, during the Middle Ages, women from various backgrounds did indeed acquire education, often demonstrating remarkable literacy skills. For noblewomen, literacy was often a practical necessity. Managing vast estates, corresponding with family members, negotiating political alliances, and overseeing household accounts all required the ability to read and write. Many noblewomen learned to read from tutors within their own homes, sometimes alongside their brothers or in the households of other aristocratic families where they were sent for upbringing. They were often taught to read devotional texts, which included psalters, books of hours, and lives of saints. These books were not just for spiritual comfort, they were also tools for learning to read and write, often beautifully illuminated and highly valued. Your records from the period show that women like Eleanor of Aquitaine, a powerful queen who lived in the 12th century, was known for her patronage of poets and troubadours, suggesting a woman deeply engaged with literature and intellectual thought. Her court was a center of cultural activity, where artistic and literary expression flourished under her influence. Beyond the nobility, convents played a crucial role in female education. These religious houses were intellectual powerhouses, providing comprehensive education for the women who entered them, often from aristocratic or wealthy urban families. The nuns were expected to read Latin, the language of scripture and scholarly texts, and to copy manuscripts. They maintained extensive libraries, transcribed religious and classical texts, and sometimes even composed their own works. Hildegard von Bingen, a 12th century abbess, is an extraordinary example. She was a visionary, composer, philosopher, mystic, and polymath. Her writings spanned theology, botany, medicine, and even a constructed language. Her detailed medical and scientific treatises, such as Physica and Causae et Curae, demonstrate a deep understanding of natural phenomena and healing practices, a level of intellectual engagement far beyond simple literacy. And her correspondence with popes, emperors, and kings shows her influence and respected intellectual standing. Other abbesses, like Roswitha of Gandersheim in the 10th century, wrote plays and poems in Latin, making her one of the earliest known female playwrights in the Western world. Her works, which often retold Christian stories and allegories, were not only educational but also culturally significant. Even in urban centers, women engaged in trade and craft often needed basic literacy for their businesses. Shopkeepers, brewers, bakers, and textile workers might need to keep records, manage inventories, or sign contracts. While formal schooling was less common for these women, informal education within families or through apprenticeships could provide practical literacy skills. The guild records from various European cities show women participating in trades, sometimes as independent masters, which would often require some level of literacy for administrative tasks. For instance, in 14th century Paris, women were involved in book production, working as illuminators, scribes, and even booksellers, roles that unequivocally demanded literacy. These women were not just consumers of books, they were active participants in their creation and dissemination. The existence of numerous personal letters, wills, and legal documents signed or commissioned by women further refutes the myth of universal female illiteracy. While many documents were written by male scribes on behalf of women, the fact that women were often the subject of these documents and actively managed their affairs suggests a level of understanding that goes beyond simple verbal communication. Their private libraries, sometimes substantial, owned by women, are also recorded in wills and inventories, indicating a desire for and access to books, and by extension, the ability to read them. These collections often included devotional texts, romances, and even some scholarly works reflecting diverse intellectual interests. Therefore, the narrative of pervasive female illiteracy in the Middle Ages is an oversimplification. While opportunities for education varied significantly by social class, geographic location, and specific historical period, countless women across Europe were literate, intellectual, and actively participated in the creation and dissemination of knowledge. Their contributions as authors, patrons, educators, and administrators underscore a rich and complex intellectual landscape that fundamentally challenges the myth of the uneducated medieval woman. Number 4, myth: medieval women were confined to the home and had no public role. A persistent myth about medieval women is that their lives were solely confined to the domestic sphere, primarily within the walls of their homes or castles, dedicated exclusively to household chores, child-rearing, and textile work. This portrayal suggests a passive existence, completely devoid of public engagement, political influence, or economic activity beyond the immediate needs of their family. The image is one of seclusion, where women were largely invisible in the broader societal and economic landscapes of their time, their voices unheard in any form outside the private family circle. This view, however, radically underestimates the dynamic and often powerful roles women played in all aspects of medieval society, from the highest echelons of royalty to the bustling streets of urban centers and the demanding fields of rural life. In reality, medieval women frequently engaged in public life, often holding significant economic, political, and social responsibilities. For noblewomen and queens, public life was often unavoidable. And queens were not just consorts, they were often regents for their young sons, ruling kingdoms in their own right, issuing charters, leading armies, and engaging in complex diplomacy. Blanche of Castile, mother of King Louis IX of France, served as regent during her son's minority in the 13th century. Her regency was marked by strong governance, successful military campaigns against rebellious barons, and astute political maneuvering. She personally led troops and negotiated treaties, demonstrating a level of public authority and military command that utterly contradicts the myth of female confinement. Eleanor of Aquitaine, who lived in the 12th century, was another formidable example. As Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right, and later Queen of France and then Queen of England, she traveled extensively, participated in crusades, managed vast territories, and influenced royal policy across two powerful kingdoms. Her political engagement was undeniable, her presence a constant in the highest political spheres of her time. Beyond the aristocracy, women in urban centers were deeply integrated into the economic fabric of their communities. They were not merely consumers but active producers and entrepreneurs. The women ran businesses, often alongside their husbands or independently in various trades. They operated breweries, bakeries, taverns, shops selling textiles, foodstuffs, and other goods. Skilled records from numerous medieval cities such as London, Paris, and Cologne list women as active members, sometimes as masters of their own crafts. For example, women were prominent in the textile industry, not just as spinners and weavers at home, but as cloth merchants, dyers, and embroiderers who owned workshops and employed others. In some cities, women even formed their own guilds, such as the Silk Weavers Guild in Paris, which was entirely run by women. These women engaged in commerce, managed finances, dealt with suppliers and customers, and trained apprentices, all activities that necessitated a very public and visible presence in the marketplace. Even in rural areas, where life was often dictated by agricultural cycles, women played indispensable roles in the public and economic life of the manor. They worked alongside men in the fields, sowing, harvesting, and managing livestock. They produced food, made clothes, and contributed to the household economy through their labor. When men were away on military campaigns or trading expeditions, women often took on the full management of the farm or estate, overseeing laborers, negotiating with landlords, and ensuring the continued productivity of the land. Widowhood, in particular, often granted women significant autonomy and public responsibility. A widow inherited her husband's business or property, becoming the head of the household and often continuing the family trade. This meant she interacted with legal authorities, entered into contracts, and participated in the local economy as an independent agent. Furthermore, women held important public roles within religious institutions. Abbesses of powerful convents managed vast estates, commanded substantial revenues, and wielded considerable spiritual and temporal authority. They often presided over large communities of nuns and lay servants, maintained complex administrative structures, and engaged in political negotiations with secular rulers and church officials. These women were not confined. They were leaders, administrators, and influencers, whose decisions impacted many lives and often extended beyond the convent walls into wider society. For example, wealthy convents might own land, collect rents, and participate in trade, with the abbess at the helm of these extensive economic activities. Women also participated in public life through legal processes. They appeared in court to defend their rights, to sue or be sued, to witness legal documents, and to engage in property disputes. Though the legal system was often biased, women actively used it to protect their interests and those of their families. Records of court proceedings indicate women arguing their cases, demonstrating an active public presence in the pursuit of justice and the protection of their economic and personal well-being. The pervasive myth of women's confinement fails to acknowledge the spectrum of roles medieval women occupied. From powerful queens shaping dynastic policies to industrious urban entrepreneurs and influential religious leaders, medieval women were visible, active, and indispensable contributors to the economic, political, and social fabric of their societies. Their involvement was not an exception but an integral part of the medieval world, proving that their presence in public life was far more substantial and diverse than often imagined. Number 3, myth medieval women had no legal rights or agency. One of the most persistent misconceptions about medieval women is that they were entirely devoid of legal rights and personal agency, existing solely as property of their fathers or husbands, with no ability to own property, control their finances, or make independent decisions. This belief often paints a picture of complete subjugation, where women were legally powerless and unable to act on their own behalf in any meaningful way. It suggests that their lives were entirely dictated by male guardians, leaving them with no means to assert their will or protect their interests within the legal framework of the time. However, historical evidence reveals a much more nuanced reality, showing that medieval women, while certainly facing patriarchal limitations, possessed a surprising array of legal rights and exercised significant agency, particularly in matters of property and inheritance. A crucial aspect of women's legal standing in the Middle Ages was the concept of dower. Upon marriage, a woman was typically guaranteed a portion of her husband's property, often 1/3, for her use during her widowhood. This was not a gift, but a legal right, and it was intended to provide for her economic security should her husband die. This dower could include land, houses, or other assets, and she had the right to manage and benefit from it. She could not sell it outright without the consent of her husband's heirs, but she could derive income from it. More importantly, upon her husband's death, this dower became her exclusive property to manage, providing her with a significant degree of financial independence and agency, particularly for widows. This meant that many widows were substantial landowners and economic actors, a stark contrast to the myth of perpetual powerlessness. Records from manorial courts across England, for instance, frequently show widows bringing cases to defend their dower rights, demonstrating their active engagement with the legal system to protect their inherited entitlements. Beyond dower, women could inherit property, particularly in the absence of male heirs. Daughters could inherit land and titles, especially in the feudal system where primogeniture, while common, was not universally applied to the exclusion of all female inheritance. Noblewomen often inherited vast estates, which they were then responsible for managing, including collecting rents, overseeing tenants, and even raising armies if necessary. Such responsibilities required a sophisticated understanding of law, administration, and finance. Women like Matilda of Tuscany in the 11th century, for example, controlled vast territories in Italy, commanding armies and engaging in high-stakes political struggles with emperors and popes, all based on her inherited legal rights and status. Furthermore, single women, whether spinsters or widows, had considerably more legal rights than married women. A single woman was considered feme sole, meaning she was legally independent and could enter into contracts, own property, sue and be sued in court, and conduct business in her own name. This status granted them a level of legal autonomy that mirrors that of men. Many urban women, especially widows who continued their deceased husbands' businesses, operated as feme sole and were active participants in the economy, legally recognized as independent entrepreneurs. City charters and guild regulations often explicitly granted women in specific trades the right to conduct business independently, reflecting a pragmatic recognition of their economic contributions. For example, in medieval London, women were legally allowed to pursue trades and own property separately from their husbands, a testament to their legal standing within the urban economic framework. Even married women, though generally under the legal authority of their husbands in a concept known as coverture, still possess some indirect legal agency. They could, and often did, participate in legal transactions alongside their husbands, consenting to sales of land or property that involved their dowry or dower rights. Their consent was often necessary for certain legal actions concerning family property. In some regions, especially in parts of Italy and France, marriage contracts could be meticulously drafted to protect a woman's separate property, her dowry, from her husband's debts or mismanagement. This dowry, distinct from dower, was property brought by the bride to the marriage, which technically remained hers or was passed to her children. Legal documents from the period frequently detail these arrangements, showing women and their families actively negotiating for legal protections. Moreover, women could act as executors of wills, manage estates, and represent their families in legal disputes. Their court records reveal women testifying, bringing petitions, and defending their interests, often quite effectively. They were not silent victims of the legal system, but active agents navigating its complexities. The very existence of lawsuits brought by women or against women demonstrates that they were recognized legal entities capable of engaging with the judicial process. The assertion that medieval women had no legal rights ignores the robust legal frameworks that, while certainly patriarchal, nevertheless carved out significant spaces for female autonomy and property ownership. From dower rights and inheritance to the legal independence of theme sole and negotiated marriage contracts, women exercised agency within the legal system, safeguarding their economic interests and shaping their own lives in ways that contradict the popular myth of complete legal powerlessness. Number 2, medieval women were entirely subservient and oppressed by men. The pervasive image of medieval women often casts them as uniformly subservient, passive, and utterly oppressed by men, without any means to exert influence, challenge authority, or express their own will. This narrative suggests a society where women were entirely voiceless and powerless, their lives completely dominated by male relatives, whether fathers, husbands, or brothers. It implies a constant state of subjugation, where individual agency was impossible and resistance unheard of. While medieval society was undeniably patriarchal and women faced significant societal and legal limitations, this generalized myth overlooks the myriad ways in which women asserted their authority, influenced decisions, and carved out spaces of power and independence, often challenging conventional norms. In reality, women found numerous avenues to exercise authority and influence, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, but always with demonstrable impact. Within the domestic sphere, while a husband was legally the head of the household, the wife often held considerable de facto authority, especially in managing the household economy, raising children, and overseeing servants. For large aristocratic households, this involved complex administration, budgeting, and logistical planning, making the lady of the house a powerful figure within her domain. Many women were skilled administrators and managers, running estates and businesses effectively, often making independent decisions that affected numerous people. Chronicles and estate records from the time often mention the wives' involvement in such matters, indicating their crucial role in the economic functioning of their households. Beyond the home, women in religious life, particularly abbesses, wielded immense spiritual and temporal power. They governed large communities of nuns, managed vast landholdings, collected tithes, and often had jurisdiction over surrounding villages. Some abbesses held feudal lands, and were even called upon to provide knights for their feudal lords, a responsibility typically associated with male lords. Hildegard von Bingen, mentioned earlier, not only managed her convent, but also corresponded with emperors, kings, and popes, offering counsel and criticism, demonstrating her significant moral and intellectual authority. Her bold challenges to ecclesiastical and secular leaders illustrate a woman unafraid to speak truth to power, a far cry from complete subservience. Other prominent mystics, like Catherine of Siena in the 14th century, influenced papal policy and undertook diplomatic missions, crossing Europe and engaging with the highest levels of political and religious authority, all while maintaining her independent voice and vision. These women leveraged their spiritual authority to achieve positions of influence rarely accessible to laywomen. Even within lay society, women often exerted political influence through their connections and roles as wives, mothers, or daughters of powerful men. Queens and noblewomen frequently acted as advisors to their male relatives, engaging in behind-the-scenes diplomacy, forming alliances, and influencing appointments. Their familial connections provided them with a unique platform for political engagement. Eleanor of Aquitaine's involvement in crusades, her regencies, and her political maneuvering across two royal courts showcase a woman who actively shaped the political landscape of her time, not a passive bystander. Her ability to navigate complex political situations and maintain her influence despite imprisonment and conflict demonstrates remarkable agency. Moreover, women sometimes directly participated in resistance and rebellion. During peasant uprisings or urban revolts, women were not merely onlookers. They were active participants, sometimes leading protests, engaging in acts of defiance, and confronting authorities. For example, during the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381, women were recorded as being involved in the destruction of property and confrontations with officials, demonstrating a direct challenge to the established order. In various sieges and conflicts, women were known to defend castles in the absence of their husbands, organizing defenses, inspiring troops, and sometimes even leading counterattacks, proving their martial capabilities and leadership under duress. The concept of comparage or co-parentage also allowed women to forge significant social networks and reciprocal obligations that extended beyond their immediate family, creating influential circles that could be leveraged for mutual support and influence. These informal networks provided a basis for collective action and solidarity among women. The myth of universal female subservience fails to recognize the agency, resilience, and diverse strategies women employed to exert power and influence within the constraints of their patriarchal society. From the domestic authority of a wife managing a household to the spiritual and political power of an abbess, the influence of a queen, or the direct action of a common woman in protest, medieval women were active, dynamic agents who shaped their world, often subtly, but sometimes with profound and undeniable force. Their ability to navigate and sometimes subvert the structures of their time showcases a far more complex and empowering reality than the myth suggests. Number 1. Myth medieval women contributed nothing to science or medicine. A pervasive myth surrounding medieval women is that they were completely absent from the realms of science and medicine, with all advancements and knowledge in these fields attributed solely to men, particularly monks, scholars, and male physicians. This view suggests that women were either uninterested in or incapable of contributing to systematic knowledge, and that their roles were limited to folk remedies passed down without any scientific rigor. The perception is that women were merely recipients of medical care or practitioners of rudimentary, unverified cures, never innovators or serious scholars in health or scientific observation. However, historical evidence reveals a significant, though often unacknowledged, presence of women as healers, medical practitioners, scientists, and contributors to the body of knowledge in these crucial fields. In reality, women were central to healthcare in the Middle Ages, especially at the community level. They were the primary caregivers within families and villages, possessing extensive knowledge of herbal remedies, midwifery, and basic surgical procedures for everyday ailments and injuries. This knowledge was often empirical, based on generations of observation and practical experience, making it a form of early scientific practice, albeit not formalized in modern terms. Midwives, in particular, were highly skilled professionals. They oversaw childbirth, provided prenatal and postnatal care, and often served as general practitioners for women and children in their communities. Their expertise was crucial and widely respected, and they often held significant social standing. Records from various towns and cities show midwives being licensed and regulated, indicating a recognized professional status. Furthermore, convents were significant centers of medical knowledge and practice. Nuns often cultivated extensive herb gardens, known as physic gardens, where they grew medicinal plants. They studied and compiled knowledge about the properties of these plants, creating herbals and medical texts that were used to treat the sick within their communities and beyond. These convents often ran infirmaries that served not only the religious community but also the local population, providing medical care and shelter. Hildegard von Bingen, the abbess mentioned earlier, stands out as a remarkable figure in this regard. Her medical and natural history works, Physica and Causae et Curae, detail a vast array of plants, animals, and minerals, their medicinal properties, and various treatments for illnesses. She systematically categorized diseases and their remedies, reflecting a deep understanding of natural phenomena and human physiology. Her writings demonstrate careful observation and logical deduction, embodying a form of scientific inquiry that was highly advanced for her time. She was not merely recording folk remedies, but synthesizing and expanding upon existing knowledge, often adding her own observations. The school of Salerno in southern Italy, a renowned medical center, is particularly significant because it was one of the few places in medieval Europe where women were not only allowed but actively encouraged to study and practice medicine. The most famous female physician associated with Salerno is Trotula of Salerno, who lived in the 11th or 12th century. She is traditionally credited with authoring or contributing to several influential medical texts, most notably Diseases of Women, often referred to as Trotula Major, which covered gynecology, obstetrics, and women's health in unprecedented detail. Her work included practical advice on everything from childbirth to contraception, fertility, and skincare. Her writings demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of anatomy, physiology, and pathology. While some modern scholarship debates the exact authorship of all texts attributed to her, it is clear that a female practitioner or group of practitioners at Salerno made substantial contributions to medical literature, indicating that women were highly skilled and respected medical authorities. The very existence of such texts and the practice of female physicians at Salerno powerfully refute the myth of female exclusion from scientific and medical pursuits. Beyond formal medical practice, women also contributed to related fields such as alchemy, which was a precursor to chemistry. While male alchemists are more widely known, historical texts and illustrations occasionally depict women involved in alchemical experiments and processes. Though often shrouded in secrecy, their participation suggests a broader engagement with proto-scientific inquiry. Women in wealthy households also oversaw the production of medicines, cosmetics, and various concoctions, employing practical chemistry and understanding of ingredients. The idea that medieval women contributed nothing to science or medicine is a gross misrepresentation. From the empirical knowledge of midwives and herbalists to the systematic medical treatises penned by nuns like Hildegard von Bingen and the advanced medical education and practice at centers like Salerno, women were deeply involved in understanding the human body, diagnosing illnesses, and developing treatments. Their contributions, often overlooked or attributed to others, were fundamental to medieval healthcare and represent significant early scientific endeavors.